All right. We're going to talk about this dynamic of spiritual vitality amongst global workers, amongst people who live cross-culturally. You've heard some of what I said last night. You just heard Nairi this morning, and from her extensive experience overseas and what she's seen both as somebody who's lived and worked in another culture as well as caring for those. Want to get some solid biblical grounding for what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be wrestling around in John and Luke. I hope you brought your Bibles electronically or otherwise. So we can look into that. We're going to spend a little bit of time. I have to tell you, I already don't like the layout of this room. I'd much prefer we had round tables. We're all sitting in circles and we could kind of talk amongst ourselves, but we'll do as best we can here. I love questions. I'm going to ask and you have the questions, but if at any point I say something that gives you pause, please throw your hand in the air and we'll stop right there and talk about it. Okay, I'd like this to be a little bit more interactive than just a long lecture. So we're going to get some good biblical grounding here. I would like to look at an actual tool that you can use. You can put it in your own hands. Hopefully this will be practical and applicable for your own journey, but especially to put in the hands of other people. To think about ways to keep themselves spiritually renewed and spiritually vital. We're also going to just share ideas amongst ourselves, some things that we've seen have worked well in the different contexts we are. So we ought to be able to learn from each other in this process here as well as what we've seen has worked well for ourselves or in organizations or churches. I'll give you some resources and that type of thing. Okay? Any other hopes or expectations for the time? You want to holler? I'd love to hear what you would hope to walk away with this morning. Amen. It's called Jesus. It's always the right answer, right? Yeah. Did I see another hand over here? Anybody got any other questions? All right. Well, as we get conversation going, hopefully it will generate a lot more questions. There's been research done. I don't know how many of you are aware of Bobby Clinton out at Fuller. He's now retired. He was a professor of leadership. I don't know what his role was, but he was in the School of Missions out in Fuller for many, many years. He's now retired, doctoral level professor. He is a theorist, true and true. I mean, he's not a very good practitioner. His students are the ones who become practitioners. And he did extensive research on starting with biblical characters and then following well-known Christian people beyond extra-biblical, from the biblical times onward, looking at how many people finish well, and for those who finish well, can we see any identifiable markers that cause them to finish well? And it was fascinating. In the leaders in the Bible, those that we have enough data to actually get a feel for how they lived the tenure of their life, biblically speaking, 1/3 of leaders finish well. Found that fascinating. Continued the research. Last I heard, they're up into several thousand different individuals they've studied through history. Theologians, church leaders, missionaries, Christian statesmen, public sector, ministry sector. They found the statistics held true. Thousands. 1/3 of leaders finish well. That's startling. You guys are going to finish well. We aren't. And that's the demographic. I mean, that ought to stop us in our tracks. Okay, I heard pride over there. Okay, you guys are going to finish well. You guys are going to fail. Yeah, it's startling. And so then they started to ask, well, what are the identifiable markers? And they came up with several of them. And one of them was, those who finish well experience repeated and regular times of spiritual renewal. And they're very intentional about it. It doesn't happen accidentally. You don't just walk down the sidewalk and God sprinkles some grace pixie dust in your life and boom, I'm renewed. And then I keep walking. I mean, it takes intentionality. It takes purposefulness. We're going to see as we look at the biblical tenure that is a responsiveness to God's initiation in our lives. God is always the initiator. We are always a responder. And we will learn that from Jesus himself. He will show us this as we look in John and Luke.
What is that?
Repeated times of spiritual renewal. So what is spiritual renewal? What is spiritual vitality? By the way, I have over here resiliency. This is a major marker of resiliency. Got a book here that myself and a number of colleagues put together. Two of our Barnabas staff, Frauke and Charlie Schaefer. One of them's a psychologist, one of them's a psychiatrist in our organization. Put together this book, and in this element of resiliency, there's a whole chapter on spiritual elements of resiliency. As Nairi was saying, that 2 to 3 year marker is key, and those are key times to be building resilient habits, traits, characteristics, attitudes, outlooks. It is very much a make or break time in a lot of workers' lives. Right now, globally, way too many missionaries are coming back after their first term. They're just not making it over the hump. Countries like Japan, for example, again, I have a very close friend who did her doctoral dissertation on this. 7 years is elimination mark. If you can make it through your first 7 years in Japan, you'll make it. That's a long time to learn the language and the culture. I mean, it's just a difficult nut to crack culturally. 7 years. Well, what's going to help me get over that 7 year hump? I mean, that's a long, long journey. These are some key markers, and there's a lot of other resources in here to talk about resiliency that you and your churches and your organizations can be very intentional about. Well, how do we get this to our people? How do we get this to our people? Yes, sir?
Quick question. Can you define finishing well? I mean, what are the
sure.
criteria?
Yeah, what is finishing well? Good question. It doesn't mean you don't fail. Did David finish well? Yeah, he did. I hope it's not I don't fail. We like to grade our failings. Well, I embezzled a little bit of money over here, but I have adultery, so I weighed out pretty good. So we graduate this thing. It's not about failing. It's not about being sinless. It's about walking well with God. At the end of your life, you are still engaging God, being responsive to God. To some degree and level, you are fulfilling the purposes that God has created and redeemed you for. Clinton, in his writing, talks a lot about destiny. That there's a sense of destiny there's a sense of calling that God has in their lives, and as men and women age and mature, their lives are more and more narrowly focused on. In our 20s and 30s, we kind of cast our net wide. We learn lots of experiences and skills. We develop our skill sets and gain relational and emotional maturity. But as we age in our 50s and 60s and 70s, our focus on what we do well becomes more and more narrowly focused, because this is the most fruitful time of our lives now. And so those who finish well are the ones who are walking with God, still seeing effective fruitfulness, reproducing themselves, those type of things as they age and get further down the journey in life. Good enough? Okay, good. All right, so it doesn't mean I don't sin. It doesn't mean I don't have moral lapses in my journey. Ideally, I don't, but we know that our God is redemptive. I don't want to read all this information. You can read this here. Though there's a startling research that, again, some of my colleagues, a good friend of mine who has since passed away, Jim Fiker, a couple other guys with other organizations did this survey. We got to about 300 or 400 field leaders. Field leaders would be people who actually live in other countries, so they're team leaders, city or regional coordinators, national level directors, that type of thing. But they're not based at executive levels here in the U.S. or an international office someplace. They're actually on the field they're doing the grassroots work, so to speak. And what we found from these several people is that those in leadership less than 3 years would say that their spiritual life is not doing very well. In other words, they would say that before I was a leader, I was satisfied with my spiritual walk is. Now that I have leadership responsibilities, it has significantly tailed off. Well, that's startling. I would hope our leaders are going to another notch. For 50% of field leaders acknowledge growing spiritually, so 50-50 there. Only 20% of leaders say that they have some type of direct report actually ask them how they're doing personally on a regular basis. Now that's organizational systemic stuff. And all I got to say, in the Church of Jesus Christ, that ought not be. If you have any type of leadership influence, positional or otherwise, some of the first questions out of your mouth is, how is it with your heart? Tell me about your walk with God. What is God speaking to you about? How are you experiencing Him? How's it going in your marriage or your singleness? How's it going with your kids? I mean, those have to be the first questions, because if those are bottoming out, I don't care what skill set you have, you're not going to last. Research just shows it. So those are that's some hard facts there. That ought to give us some pause. go down to the second to last bullet point there. It starts out with spiritual vitality. Spiritual vitality is a topic that missionaries must be directly asked about, given permission to significantly invest in, and mentored in more meaningful practices. Don't assume anything. Just because you're working with this stellar organization in northern Iran amongst an unreached people group, don't say, well, man, you must be a spiritual superstar. You must be on top of the mountain. Do not assume that. I don't assume anything anymore with anybody. And if it happens to be there's a lot of vibrancy there and there's not a lot of struggling, a lot of moral issues, I rejoice. But I don't assume anything with anybody. We're all frail and broken, and you've already begun to hear the stories. It wears on us. So I'd encourage you to ask questions in a tone of caring, not one of, I'm holding you accountable. Not that tone is not safe. So it's one of, how can I help you? How are you doing? What do you need? That tone will always win the day. All right? Okay. Any questions about those first few bullet points if you happen to have a chance to read them over? Because what I'd like to really do is roll up our sleeves here and jump into John and Luke. Yes?
The comment you said is organizational system.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I do member of an organization, an agency, and it's in the DNA. You cannot avoid those questions.
Yes.
So, I think in an organization, we're treating just as individuals, but
Yeah.
that statistic could be fixed.
Yeah, well, leaders shape organizational culture, and so if leaders are aware and cognizant and intentional about these things, it'll be like a dye in water. It'll just permeate the entire culture, and that's what we want. Is we don't want to just have this dynamic of just a few individuals here and there, but there's a culture where that this is a part of who we are. Say, I'm in this organization. This is who we are. This is what we do. I must say, many workers that I've worked with around the world, after we've talked about these type of topics, I'm very aware that once they get settled in their heart, yeah, these are the things I want to work on, I want to grow on, I will ask them, the next question will be, okay, now how are you going to live this out in the context in which you live and work in? Both in the country they live in, but also maybe the organizational systems they live in, because those can be counterproductive to the desire to grow in these areas. Unfortunately, I see it all too often. North American, yeah. I'm staying true to our culture here because I don't want to speak on behalf of other regions of the world. Although I must say, I've done a lot of working with Far Eastern Asians, Central Asians, and I'm convinced anymore this is not just a cultural dynamic. This is a human heart dynamic. I just see it in every culture I go into. I haven't worked a lot in Latin America or Sub-Saharan Africa, but in the cultures that I've worked in, I just see this everywhere I go. I remember being asked to talk to a bunch of Central Asian church leaders on Sabbath a number of years ago, and I literally had glassy-eyed stares. I mean, they really did not have any conceptual idea how to work Sabbath into their lives. Literally, they absolutely did not have any idea. It was completely foreign to their faith experience. All right, John chapter 5. Turn there with me. This is what we're going to do. We know Jesus went public in his ministry life at about what age? Okay, and he was crucified at about what age? Okay, so for the first 30 years of his life, as far as we know, he was fairly incognito. That raises all kinds of questions already. I mean, I understand the providential timing of God and all that. I understand that. God comes to earth. There are people with leprosy. There are oppressive systems, the Roman Empire and a religious system. There's people with demons and all this stuff when he was 28, right? So why isn't he getting stuff done? Fascinating to me. For 30 years, he remains relatively silent. He goes public, and then one would think he's got 3 years to get these 12 guys in shape, get his message out there. He's going to crank 24/7, right? But he doesn't. And we're going to look at the Gospels to get a feel for the tenure of Christ's life. And we're going to see in John, particularly in the Gospel of John, if we had 5 hours today, we'd just plow through the Gospel of John, and we would see some beautiful pictures of what Jesus models for the guys, and then he turns around and says, "As me, so you." In fact, if you just go on your own and do a study in the upper room passages, 13, 14, 15, 16, John, and 17, the prayer, and you just write down all the just as, even so. Just as me, even so you. Just like me, so now you. If you just write those out, it's quite a remarkable study. Jesus is basically saying, you have now seen how I have lived my life and related to my Father, so send I you. Go do exactly as I've shown you. So what is it that he's done? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at John chapter 5. So if you want to turn to John chapter 5, we're going to let Jesus set the tone for us here, and then we're going to wrestle out what does this really look like today, here and now, and the reality of our world with our current tech systems and all that kind of stuff. So John chapter 5, verses 19 to 30. Somebody who reads well, maybe in the back of the room, you want to just stand up and read that paragraph for us? John chapter 5, verses 19 to 30. And here's what I'd like to... First, can I get a volunteer? Somebody want to do that? Okay, thank you. Here's what I'd like for you to pay attention to as our brother's reading this passage. How does Jesus describe his relationship to his Father? His Father to him and him to his Father. Just pay attention to that, okay? Thanks.
So Jesus said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise. For the Father loves the Son, and shows him all that he himself is doing. And greater works than these he will show him, so that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whom he will. The Father judges no one, but he has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life. Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment. I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me.
Great, thank you. Perfect. All right. John is a brilliant writer. I'm astounded this guy's a fisherman. He does not use words frivolously. If there's a word in there, it is really, really intentional. This paragraph we just read is loaded with themes that started all the way back in John chapter 1, and he carries all the way through John chapter 21. I mean, he's a brilliant writer, obviously guided by the Spirit, but nonetheless brilliant. So, what does Jesus say about his relationship with how he and his Father interact while Jesus is on earth? And let's just make a list here, okay? Let's start calling them out. Let's start at verse 19. What's the first thing Jesus says about his relationship with his Father and what he's doing here? Okay, I'm going to put it this way. Does nothing on his own. Our various versions will read slightly different there. But he does nothing on his own accord. He does nothing without his Father. Okay, that's in verse 19. Let's make a real quick list here. What else? What's the next thing it says?
He does what he sees.
Yeah, so the Son does what he sees his Father doing. So the Father is doing something, the Son sees it, and he mimics that. Okay? All right? What else? Let's keep making our list here. You can write this down on your paper as well. Back, front, wherever you want to. Keep going. Yeah, right. Yes. So there's an emphasis here on this only thing here, okay?
Father shows them all that he is all the truth.
Okay, I'm abbreviating here, obviously. Father shows Son what he's doing.
Yeah, really in the context of this loving relationship.
What's it say there? What's the text say?
Father loves his son.
All right, Father loves the Son. Key. Fascinating that he would comment on that. All right, what else? Yes?
Says he'll do greater.
What verse are you in? 20. Okay. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he is himself doing, and greater works than this will he show him. So he's going to continue. He's already shown him what is going on now, present, and he's going to show him more stuff, even greater things. Okay. So we see that. All right. What else?
Allowance to judge to the son.
Yeah. So the Father has delegated some responsibilities to the Son, and he has given judgment to the Son. So the Father delegates, gives judgment to Son. All right. What else?
Raises the dead and gives life.
Okay. And where does this life come from? Yeah. What verse are we in here? Verse 21. For the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so the Son gives him life to whom he wills. Okay. All right. Verse 26 is a stunner. Okay. The Father has life in himself, and so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. So in other words, one member of the Godhead has life, and this member of the Godhead has given life to the other member of the Godhead. But they're still both God. And here's how the patristics, the theologians that came, as they were wrestling with this, the theologians that came after the apostles, all the way down through Augustine, all the way down through Luther, all the way down to Jonathan Edwards, wrestling with what's going on here in the Trinity. And the idea is that for all eternity, the Father has been giving his life and his love to the Son. For all eternity, the Son has been the beloved of the Father. For all eternity, the Father has beheld the Son, and he has loved the Son. And for all eternity, the Son has been the beloved of the Father, beheld by the Father, gazed upon by the Father, and has received the Father's life and love. And in response, the Son returns the gaze to the Father and responds in love to him. And that's how the patristics, not just with John chapter 5, but the rest of John and so much else is going on in the New Testament here. But the idea here is that the Father gives life to the Son. We see that in verse 26, and then earlier in 21, the Son gives life to whomever he will. Basically, to whomever will receive it, Son gives life to us. And that reception, belief, reception, acceptance, huge thematic theme in the Gospel of John. All right, let's keep moving along here. Yes, sir.
One could argue then that not only did the Father raise the Son from the dead, not only did the Holy Spirit raise the Son from the dead, the Son has raised himself.
Yeah, technically no. he was raised from the dead because the Father raised him to life. So the life that he was raised, and I think it says that pretty clearly.
How it says the Son has authority to take his life. No one takes it from him.
Yeah.
Authority to lay it down, he has authority to
Take it up again. That's right. Yeah, sure. You're right. No, you're okay. That's good. Okay, verse 22. The Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son. We've covered that. That all may honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. So when we honor the Father, we honor the Son there. Let's see. Let's go down to verse 25. We already covered verse 25, 26. The Father has given life to the Son. The Son has life in himself. Okay, we already talked about how the Father has given him authority to execute judgment. Let's go down to verse 30, because verse 30, he basically repeats verse 19. This is verse 19 here. And then in verse 30, he essentially repeats himself again. He says, I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, so the Son hears the Father. As I hear, so I judge, so I do. The Son hears the Father. And we have so many other passages we could go to. Oh my goodness, it continues to unfold. John chapter 8, we begin to start looking at the mutual indwelling. Where, first of all, we have John 6, where he's saying, I am the Father and I are one. Then he talks about the Father's in me and I'm in the Father. Keeps on just expounding this mutual indwelling. Let's just stop here for a second. Who's the initiator in this relationship? The Father's always the initiator. He does nothing on his own. The Father is always the initiator. The Son is always the responder. So when I read the Gospel of John and looking at this theme that we're talking about today, it's like the Gospel of John kind of gives us a behind-the-scenes relational dynamic. What's going on between the Father and the Son? Whereas Matthew, Mark, and Luke kind of say, well, now, if we were to see what that looked like in public, this is kind of what it would look like. So this is the relational dynamic. This is how it's lived out. So what I mainly wanted to point out here is that the Father is the initiator. The Father is always speaking, showing, telling, giving to the Son, and the Son is always receptive, always responsive, and doing that which the Father shows him to do. So we get up to John 14:11. The words you hear me say are not my own. It's the Father in me doing the work. And that's how so mutually intertwined their lives are. John 14:31, kind of a culmination verse. The world must learn that I love the Father, and I do exactly as He shows me, or commands me, or teaches me to do. So what does this look like in Luke? Keep your finger in John. Jump over to Gospel of Luke. There's a fascinating thread in the Gospel of both Mark and Luke where it describes what Jesus' private life, so to speak, kind of looks like a little bit. What his, if we were to superficially slap these words on it, what his spiritual life looks like. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look just at a day in the life of Jesus in Luke chapter 4, verses 31, actually not to 44, to 42. That's a typo. John 31 to 42. Excuse me, Luke. I got John on the brain. Yeah, Luke chapter 4, verses 31 to 42. What's fascinating about this is very close to a 24-hour period of time in Christ's life, and we're given very, very few of those outside of the Passion Week. But yet this gives us pretty close to one of those days. So would somebody like to read Luke 31 to 42 for us, please? Nice and loud. Yeah, thank you.
Sea of Galilee, and he was teaching them on the Sabbath. They were astonished at his teaching, for his words possessed authority. And in the synagogue there was a man who had the spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried out with a loud voice, "Ha! What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? You come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, come out of him." Had thrown him down in their midst. He came out of him, having done him no harm. And they were all amazed and said to one another, "What is this word? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out." And reports about him went out to every place in the surrounding region. And he arose and left the synagogue and entered Simon's house. Now Simon's mother-in-law was ill with a high fever, and they appealed to him on her behalf. And he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. And immediately she rose and began to serve them. Now when the sun was setting, all those who had any who were sick with various diseases brought them to him. And he laid his hands on every one of them and healed them. And demons also came out of many, crying, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak, because they knew that he was the Christ. And when it was day, he departed and went into a desolate place.
Okay.
And the people
We'll
saw
stop there. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, thank you. So he's in Capernaum, up in Galilee. What day of the week is it? Sabbath, Saturday. Okay. What do all the good practicing Jews do on Sabbath? Yeah, they go to the synagogue and they worship and stuff. They have their rituals and such. Sabbath would begin at sunset on Friday evening. So when the sun literally dropped behind the horizon line, dusk, Sabbath began. Lots of rituals, lighting of candles, meals, blessings, this type of thing. But essentially, Shabbat, if you were here last night in Nairi session, Shabbat means to cease. Resting is part of ceasing, but the idea is cessation from normal everyday activity. Well, this is not a day of cessation for Jesus. He's teaching in the synagogue. Luke comments twice that the people were very impressed with the tone of Jesus' teaching. They were impressed upon by his authority. They're astonished, is what I have here in the ESV. All amazed about this. And there's this interesting guy in the synagogue who has a demon, and we don't know who this person is. Was he just passing through the community, or was he a regular member of the congregation? It seems to imply he was a regular guy, and until there was the presence of true spiritual authority in the room, there was no need for the demon to manifest itself. Regardless, it does manifest himself. Jesus deals with it, and everybody walks home from the synagogue, and they're saying, "Did you see that? That was like the coolest synagogue service I have ever been. Did you see what happened to that demon?" I mean, they hadn't seen anything like that in a long time. This guy first stands up and wows them with their teaching, and then he does what he does with the demon. All right. After service, they go to Simon's house. This is Simon Peter. Only indication that I'm aware of that we know this guy was married. We know so little about the disciples' lives. It would have been pretty odd for these guys not to be married. Not profoundly unusual, but the norm would have been for them to be married. Go to his mother-in-law's house. She's ill. Jesus heals her. She does the culturally appropriate response. She has male, non-family members in her house on the Sabbath. You provide excellent hospitality. She gets up, whips up the Sabbath meal. What happens in verse 40? What happens before that? The sun sets. So when the sun sets, Sabbath is over. So here's what I imagine them doing. They're standing in the doorway. They're watching the sun. Okay, let's go. And here they come. Did you see what he did today? I bet he can do that for me. And so I don't know if they're using wheelbarrows or donkeys or what. I mean, they're dragging everybody. Notice Luke's terminology. All. Everyone. I mean, this is a pretty inclusive terminology. They bring them, and they have no idea how long this lasted. Capernaum's a pretty good-sized town. It's a fishing village, a fishing town on the sea there. How long did it take? Did it take him an hour to tend to all these people? Did it take him 3 hours? Was this an all-nighter? I don't know. But Jesus tends to all these people. And then it says, early in the next morning, he got up and he left all those people with all their needs, and he went to a desolate place to pray. And this single verse here in verse 42 begins a theme that Luke's going to come back to again and again and again, the Gospel of Luke. Jump over to Luke chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. Luke's writing style is typically one to write a series of stories or vignettes and then give a summary statement, more stories and such, and a summary statement. Here's one of the earlier summary statements in the Gospel of Luke. He says, "But now even more, the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But Jesus would withdraw to desolate places and pray." Now, if you were to go through the Gospel of Luke with a pencil and circle the word crowds, mobs, hordes, great multitudes, whatever your version says, it becomes thematic. Jesus is very quickly going to become the rock star of the hill country of Galilee. We'll see this in the next chapter we're going to look at here. Luke is saying two things are becoming prominent in Jesus' public life. Lots of people with lots of needs, and Jesus gets away from all the people and all their needs. I think the NIV says often. How often is often? I don't know. But it was significant enough that it was thematic that Luke pointed it out. Let's go over to the next chapter. Luke chapter 6. Now let me read verses 12 to 17. Luke chapter 6. "In those days, Jesus went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose from them the 12, whom he named apostles." And then we have the 12 guys there listed in verses 14, 15, and 16, down to verse 17. And it says, "He came down with them," that is with the 12, "and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people." There's those words, hordes of people. "From all of Judea," that's the largest province there, "and Jerusalem, which is in Judea, and the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon, which is way up to the northwest along the seacoast, who came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all the crowd sought to touch him, for power came out from him and healed them all. So some commentators make the observation that Jesus went from solitude to community to public ministry. Whether that was Luke's intention or not, it's an interesting observation. So we find Jesus alone praying. By the way, Luke chapter 4 is where Jesus' public life begins. Before that, we have the childhood narrative, the birth childhood narrative. We have the baptism, the temptation passage. When we get Luke, this is very early in Jesus' public ministry. In these 3 chapters in a row, we have him being marked out as being alone to pray, to be away from people with their needs. So he was alone praying, called the 12, went down, there's these hordes of people, and they were all politely waiting in line till it was their turn, so Jesus could tend to them next, right? Next. No. It's like a rugby scrum. Everybody's trying to touch him, because if you just touched him, whatever was ailing you was done. I can't imagine what it was like for him. Pushing and pulling and grabbed and yelling. This guy over here is doing a backflip because now he can. And this guy over here's got a demon in him who's throwing people around trying to get at Jesus. I mean, it must have been bedlam. And this is Jesus' public life. Lots of people, multitudes, people traveling days and days. There were no tweets. There was no Facebook. There was no text. They just heard about this guy in the hill country of Galilee, and if you go find him, he'll cure what ails you. And so they start walking from Tyre and Sidon. Oh, I heard he was in Capernaum. They go there. Oh, no, he left 3 days ago and headed south. So they head south. Oh, no, he's over there. And they finally catch up with this guy, and they're dog dead tired, and they just want to touch him. This is his public life. And yet, he often withdrew to lonely places. We spend a lot of time in some different scenarios in our organizations wrestling with this. We are a caregiving organization. And if there's anything we have, is we have job security. There are needs. Everywhere we go, we needs. You show up to work with one team, and it's like every other team in town hears you're in town. Hey, can you meet with our team too? I'm struggling with my marriage. Will you talk with us? And my kids can... It just comes and comes and comes. So what we argue is that we as an organization cannot be need-driven. Need cannot dictate calling. Something larger in our life has to dictate calling. I would argue by wrestling through the Gospel of John that Jesus was not need-driven. Jesus was Father-driven. Father showed Jesus what he was doing, and Jesus did only that. I do nothing on my own initiative. I do nothing on my own. I only do what I hear. I only do what I see. Only. Now, we just don't have the time to go through all the passages I'd love to go through. And we spend time in chapter 3, and 5, and 7, and 8, and 9. We just keep unpacking this theme that Jesus keeps on hammering about again and again and again. And I think in Luke, we do see him being responsive and attentive to needs, but we also see many indications of the gospel that are flat out confusing. Hey, this village over here is calling for you. No, I have other places I need to go. He walks up to the pool, and there's people laying all over the place. He only heals that guy. Well, why doesn't he heal them all? He's the only one who can do that. I don't know. But something has to be driving Jesus other than needs. And for an organization that's responsive to needs such as mine, we will kill ourselves if we just answer every 911 call that comes into us. And we are receiving a flood of 911 calls in our organization. So there has to be something driving me other than just, you need me. And I need to be needed. I like to be wanted and needed, so I'll respond to your need. I'll be dead in years. Out of the game. I will not remain any level of spiritual vibrancy. So let's go over to John 15, the well-known John the vine passage. We are now in the upper room. For the sake of time, we're just going to come around the corner here really quickly. And we're going to see that we're very, very much in this upper room discourse. Jesus is now beginning to say, hey, what you guys have witnessed and seen in me, it is now true for you as well. And we have this well-known passage here about the vine and the branches. You know it well, but I'd like for it to be couched in some of these themes that we've already drawn out. I want to look at verse 5 in particular. He says, I am in the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, I talked about this last night, this element of communion, abiding is core, it's the focus, it's the central element here. Whoever abides in me and I in him is mutual indwelling. It's he that bears much fruit. Oh, here's that statement again. For without me, you can do nothing. You can do nothing on your own. If it's true for me, it is true for you. And so I don't want to stand back and think, what does he mean by nothing? I mean, like nothing, or just like some things nothing, or like I can take my wife out for a date, but I can't go preach a sermon. Nothing. I mean, what's nothing? Well, that's how we try to make it into a formula. That's where we want somebody to lay out here's the 5 steps of doing something or nothing type of thing, and it's meant to be relational. He's drawing me deeper into communion, so that as I walk in communion with him. And the Son is giving to me what the Father has given to him. He will guide me and show me the things I ought to say yes to and I ought to say no to. And I'm telling you, I'm counting on that. Because I can't say yes to all the requests I get these days. Just as a pastor of missionaries. I just can't. And all of you are experiencing the same dynamic. Luke chapter 9. We won't turn there. I'll just kind of paraphrase it for you. This is interesting. If we had time again, we'd look at other Luke passages. But in Luke chapter 9, we have the sending out of the 12. So in the verses, Jesus is giving them instruction. It says he gave them authority and power. Again, from the Father to the Son to us. So he gives them authority, power, instruction, sends them out. They come back. They're all wowed up about what they did and such. And then it says that Jesus sought to get them away by themselves to go into retreat. Mark chapter 6 is the passage this is in. I think it's around verses 29 or 30. It's a well-known statement. It says there were so many people coming and going that they could even have time to eat. And Jesus said, we got to get out of here. Now, in both of these passages, Luke 9 and Mark 6, the intended retreat was interrupted and we have the feeding of the 5,000. It says Jesus took the guys, they tried to get away, there was a crowd, he felt compassion, he healed them. Interestingly enough, he put the guys in the boat. Finally, they're alone. He dismisses the crowd, and he goes off and prays. Finally, he's alone. It still happens. And so if Jesus wasn't 24/7, running around the Galilean hillside, frenetically attending to all the needs of the world, then maybe I ought not be either. Maybe I really ought to take Sabbath seriously and cease once a day. Maybe I ought to often withdraw to desolate places, however often is. Again, no formula is given to us. What's your impressions from these passages? What strikes you? A burden lifted. Okay. Good. Yes, ma'am.
It makes me hungry to know what dependency really means in my life.
Okay, great. Yes. And that's something we probably should just go out and figure out, right? No. Anytime we bump into something like that, I've been in the process of repenting, of trying to figure my life out. I only want to do what my God shows me. So when I say, Lord, I desire greater dependence, will you teach me what dependence looks like? Father, I want to be responsive to what you're initiating in my life. I don't even know what that looks like. Will you please show me what that looks like? Will you teach me? Father, what does it look like? I mean, is it possible that the words I'm saying this morning are not my own, but it's the Father in me doing the work? I mean, is that remotely possible? Could you teach me what that looks like, Father? It keeps taking my nose and turning me away from myself and trying to figure things out, lifting my gaze to Him. It keeps turning me relationally back to Him. And that's the whole point. Great. What else? Other thoughts? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yeah, I was born out of relationship. Yep, very much so. Did I see a hand over here? Somebody? No? Yeah, okay, good. Yeah.
I really appreciated your point about not getting addicted being needed.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that a little bit more, yes. I don't ever struggle with that, by the way. Yeah.
What if you're talking to a missionary who responded to, said that they were called because there was a need,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're getting burned out.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do at that point? Do you tell them when you need to come home and
Yeah.
figure out what your real calling?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Question is, what do you do with a missionary who's who looks like they're burning out because they've been responsive to a need. Maybe they've gone to an unreached people group or something. Is our God responsive to needs? Is He not? I mean, He didn't just stand all far and say, man, that world's messed up. Here's a little bit of grace. No, He came. He gave Himself to us. The nature of our God's love is that He's self-sacrificing and self-giving. And so He came to us. He walked amongst us. He died for us. And so He invites us to do the same thing. He does. We still do have the biblical mandate, follow me, pick up your cross, deny yourself. We still have that, but it's born out of relationship. So He does invite us to be responsive to the needs of the world, whatever they might be.
But if that's the only thing that drew you to the mission field, you know what I'm saying? Like you said, needs don't dictate your calling. And
Yes.
If that's how they defined it initially,
Yes.
what would you do with it?
Well, I would say that's probably 98% of us. I mean, I was on the mission field at 25. I didn't even know how to tie my own shoes at the age of 25. I don't know whose idea was thought it was good for me to go over and learn Chinese and plant a church. I didn't even know how to plant a church at the age of 25. But there I was. And you think my identity was firmly established in God by that age? Oh my goodness. I was so emotionally, relationally immature in my 20s still. So no, it wasn't. So God knows. I mean, He's very gracious, compassionate, gentle with us. And here's just another. I remember the aha moment I got probably about 2 years into this venture there in Hong Kong. We're sitting on the edge of the bed. I was exhausted from trying another day of language study, and I thought, I don't have what it takes to do this job. And it was like this lightning bolt in my head. You know, I came to save the Chinese world, and I think God brought me here to grow me up. I mean, God wasn't just. I wasn't just a tool in His hand. I was somebody that He was continuing to redeem my life. So that was quite an interesting aha moment for me. I'm going to hold on to that question. Let me make sure I come back to it. I just want to get ahead of ourselves. There are a few more hands back here. Yes, sir.
It just sparked a thought. I mean, in an age of management by objectives and dealing with success factors, this is very counterintuitive.
Absolutely. And this is systemically getting us into problems. Management of objectives. What did you say? Sorry, not written very neat.
Yeah, the emphasis on success and goal setting.
Yep.
And, process, all of that.
Yes.
Just feels somewhat counterintuitive.
Yes. Oh yeah, it is. This is very much, as we were talking last night, is missional oriented, task oriented. Do we have goals? Do we want Bibles to be translated in the languages that don't have the Word of God? Absolutely. Do we want churches to be established? Absolutely. Do we want elders to be raised up in that church? Absolutely. These are all desirable objectives. But when this gets to be out in front, now we're in trouble. All has to be born out of relationship, not out of goals. And this is where we're getting ourselves. This is where our evangelical world is marked too much by, frankly, business models, as opposed to Trinitarian Christocentric models. It gets us in trouble. Okay, just before I move on here, we're starting to move down the road a little bit. Any other observations or thoughts from John and Luke? Yes?
Jesus had to say no.
Yeah, absolutely, every day. He said no. And that is a permissible word to use in English vocabulary. Yeah. Yes.
That is so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
All
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
we needed to ask, we love the relationship with one. All these needs, which do you have us to?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have the Christ-like quality of being compassionate
Yeah.
for all the needs. I think that's extremely difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. I, as a caregiver, when somebody comes to me for a need, especially a need that I have the skill set to respond to, and I say no because I'm already buried over here, it will always create a tension in me. But I have to become comfortable with that tension. If I say yes because I don't want you to be upset with me and I don't like the dissonance it creates in me, I'm saying yes for all the wrong reasons. I still may tend to your need, but yeah. So be aware of the tension it creates. Be aware of some of the paradoxes in our life. But those can't be the reasons that drive us. There has to be something more relational that drives us. Yes, ma'am.
Wondering, how do we, the Son discern what is the Father's
That's the lifelong prayer. Sorry. I ask the Father every day, show me your ways that I may walk in them. Teach me your paths. Guide me. You're my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. That's all I know to do is to turn back to Him. And yeah, I've got to make concrete decisions. I got an invitation to this country. Do I say yes or no? I got an invitation to this conference. Do I say yes or no? And all I can say is that over the tenure of journeying with the God year after year after year, it begins to become more clear to me of what He's asking me to give my life to and what's permissible for me to say no and say, you know what, this guy in my organization, he would do great at that, or she would be fantastic. Instead of me saying yes, I'll hand it off to her or whatever and collectively respond. There's no formula here. And what I would like to encourage you to do is turn all your how questions into who questions. Who am I going to relate to in this that I may learn from Him, that He may show me? Again, how oftentimes is born of this. Is how do I get this stuff done? And that tends to lead us astray at times. Now, these are important questions. We want to have effective ministries. But it's not the first question we ask. It just comes down the line a little ways. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't necessarily, accountability is one word. I use the word conversation. And our organization, our leadership philosophy is to put the decision-making process down to the lowest level. Let our staff make the decisions as much as they can, but we're increasingly encouraging that to be done in a context of conversation. Hey, I just got invited to Romania to work with this church. What do you guys think? What do you see? We can wrestle through that in conversation, and collectively we can discern together if that's the right thing to say yes to or not. But yes, absolutely. We always want to do it in conversation with other people. I don't trust myself all the time. I don't have clear objectivity. I don't see parts of I have blind spots. I don't say yes to anything without my wife first saying, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I got myself way too much trouble. Not with her. I got myself in trouble by saying yes to things compulsively over the years. So yeah, my wife, my friends, my colleagues, my leadership, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Can I promise that at some point in this talk you address this question over here about we respond to needs because we like to be needed?
Yeah.
Sort of the pride and self-worth.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Specifically, I'd like to know if you're a member here versus I make that one of the workers.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, part A first. All right. Now, I don't remember who came up with this, and I've adopted it. It's called the cycle of grace, and I probably totally butchered it. If you're familiar with the cycle of grace, and this doesn't look anything like what you've read in a book or seen before, that's because I've messed it all up. The idea is that we are adopted. So as I said last night, my identity isn't that of an organizational leader or a shepherd teacher or whatever. I am a son. I'm adopted. I didn't grow up in a church home. I trusted Christ just before I left for college. I understand living in darkness. I understand being a spiritual orphan in this world. And so I'm adopted, and I'm a son or I'm a daughter. And by the way, just because this is such a sensitive issue in our world in general, when the New Testament writers talk about sonship, they're being very, very deliberate with their terminology. This is not first century male chauvinistic gender insensitivity. The Father gives all of His self to His Son. And the Father has so enjoyed loving His Son that He wanted other sons to love. And the Son has so enjoyed being the beloved of the Father that He wanted others to be the beloved of the Father. And so the Son came to this world that His Father may have more sons. It's a theological statement. Just like the church is the bride of Christ. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I don't picture myself in white lace very often, okay? But he's conveying a theological truth when he talks about the church being the bride of Christ. Spotless and pure, prepared for the bride, by the bride for Himself. And so he's conveying theological truth. So when you read Paul or John or other writers talking about being sons, It's not because they're indifferent to the women in the church. They're conveying a theological truth. We are adopted, and now that all that the Father is pouring into His Son, capital S, He is now pouring into all His sons, small s. Of course, sons and daughters. We're all adopted ones. So I just want to be aware of the theological significance. So we're adopted, and we have acceptance. Sorry, this is not bolted down, so it's like trying to catch a greased pig here. Acceptance. So we have acceptance. So I don't have to fight and work for my acceptance. And out of that sense of acceptance and such, I have my identity. This is who I am. So when Jesus, we see this in Jesus' baptism, we see it at the Mount of Transfiguration. My beloved Son, my beloved Son. Listen to Him. This is my chosen one. He's mine. I want all the world to see who is mine. And Jesus, in the Gospel of John, I think it's 42 times, says, the Father has sent me. The Father has sent me. Jesus knows from where He came from. He says it again and again and again and again. And with a firm sense of identity, then we do our works, our calling, the rest of our life, our vocation, whatever. This is what we do. Where we get out of whack is when we go this way. I do what I do, so I have a sense of identity, so I gain people's acceptance, and now I feel like I'm important. I know who I am. And so most of us coming into this world, we are naturally going to start here. It just doesn't matter how mature we are as a 25-year-old. We're almost always going to be struggling to find our sense of identity, and we're going to do it from performance. What people think of us, what am I good at, what do I get applause for, what do I get pats on the back for, what do people think I'm beautiful for. This is where I get my sense of identity. And all of our life, God is trying to swing this puppy back around the right way. No. Know how I see you. You are my son. You are my daughter. You are a beloved one. You are accepted by me. This is your rock bottom identity, and from this you do everything you do. So this gets muddied. I need to be reminded of this every day of my life, because I will trail off of here, not find myself down here, and I'm wondering what somebody's thinking about me, and did I do the right thing, and what have I messed up, and oh my gosh, what's going to happen now, and I'm down here. This leads me astray, and so I need to be reoriented every moment of my life. And so, a lot of times when we go to the unreached people of the world, we are coming out of a sense of identity. God gives us a heart of compassion. He puts a calling in our life, and so we go to the unreached peoples, or we want to pastor and care for people who are in needs. But a lot of times it starts getting all muddied up, and things aren't going well. And that was pretty cool. I got asked to speak to that conference, and everybody thought I was really great, and I think I want to do some more of that. I want to go to more conferences and speak and get some more of that stuff. And so all of a sudden we get disoriented again, and it gets us backwards. Some people just simply don't have the eyes and ears yet to hear that, and this is okay, because it's not my job to save them. The Holy Spirit is quite capable of guiding people, disrupting their lives if He wants to. That's what He did in my life. He profoundly disrupted my life to break me out of this cycle. Mine was a health crisis, a series of health crises that finally began to break the back of this unhealthy cycle in my life. It was a grace. Painful, confusing, confounding, infuriating, absolutely undone. Once He took this away, now I have to come back through here and wrestle. Well, if I can't do this now because I'm so sick, who am I? Those literal words came out of my mouth. Well, that was a wake-up call. I guess my identity is way too much wrapped up. By the way, this usually happens someplace in the 40s. So if you're not there yet, good news ahead. If you're beyond that, then you have your own stories. Everybody over 40 has their stories to tell, how God has disrupted their life. Relational crisis, financial crisis, professional crisis, health, cancer, divorce, wayward kids, church splits, getting fired from your job. God uses all kinds of fun stuff to get our attention. And it's all acts of love. We'll talk about that in my next session on suffering. So anyways, this is a good orientation. So what we're talking about here is what Jesus did is He only did what He saw His Father doing. I am my Father's. I am the Father. I'm the Son. His entire identity was that of a son. The Father sent the Son only does what the Father shows him to do, and that's what guided him in the process. But this is a lifelong journey. We got 20 minutes. I'm going to bring us back around to where we're headed this morning, okay? I'll recommend some books that will help you to wrestle through these things so you can wrestle on this some more. Go to page 2. We're not going to take time there at the top to pause. We kind of did that together as a group, but I'd encourage you to answer some of those questions there that I have at the top of the page. Here is a tool for you. Out of the monastic world comes this concept of a rule of life. And really a rule of life is just a way of creating habits and patterns and attitudes and actions in your life. This is how I want to intentionally live my life. And so I have literally done this. I don't do it quite like this anymore, but this was very helpful down there at the very bottom of the page. Here's a tool that you can put in the hand of other people. It's kind of give them a day retreat or a week or longer, and say, would this be helpful for you to consider? What are the activities, the practices that you need to do, you need every day of your life, every week of your life, every month of your life, what you want to be doing every year that are going to help nurture vibrancy and renewal in your life. So, personally for me, I need some lingering time in the Word and to sit still. If I get up in the morning and I hit the floor running, that starts a very bad pattern for the rest of the day. I'm just going to be running like a fool the rest of that day. But if I put my bum in a chair and I open up the Word and I sit with my Father for a good long time, well over an hour, He begins to remind me who I am for that day and what I'm to be about. I still have very productive days. I still get a lot of work done, but I'm oriented. Sometimes when I have those days that I'm sitting at my desk all day long, I just get my nose buried in my laptop and all the stuff I'm trying to do, and I forget. So I will often pull out this little funky thing, and I put timers on it. Sometimes I set a timer for once an hour, and every hour, timer goes off, turn it off, and I just sit there. Remind myself who I am. I'm not the captain of my own universe. I'm your son. Take a deep breath. Notice all the knots in the back of my neck. That's not healthy. Something's not going good inside of me. Okay, go back to work. But these are some of my patterns. Weekly, Sabbath every week. One of the things we learned from research that we did with these leaders is that it was some atrocious number. Less than 10% of leaders actually take deliberate time set aside every week to think, ponder, pray about the important decisions in front of them. In other words, they get an email, make a decision. Get an email, make a decision. Got a meeting, make a decision. Just making those decisions because we got to get stuff done. And so few leaders actually say, you know what, Friday afternoon, I'm out of the office, away from my laptop. I'm just going to sit down with a legal pad, and I'm just going to sit and say, now what are the big issues that God has in front of me? And what is He showing me and how I want to respond to them? Who I need to be asking counsel from? Just slowing that process down. In other words, many organizational leaders don't even take the time to think. The process. That scares the lights out of me. And so one of the things that I build in my week is times of weekly reflection. If I'm not doing that, my compulsivity takes off on me. Yes, sir. Here.
Spend most of my time in corporate America as a senior leader. Talked to us recently, responsible for that. He said, the secret of my success is getting out of the doer vortex. That's what he called it.
Huh?
Out of the doer vortex, so I can get time to think and plan and have vision. So,
out of the business sector. I love it. All right. What do you need monthly? Do you take a half a day or a full day of prayer every month? What do you need annually? I seek and try to find out some place that I can go where I am not responsible to give it all. I'm purely in a receptive mode. A conference, a retreat, someplace. Hang out with some buddies of mine, someplace where we're asking good questions of one another. I deliberately build all of these things. These are part of my spiritual practices. My relational practices I constantly build up in me. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Strength Finders. My number one theme is learner. If I don't have my nose buried in books, I very slowly begin to get thin. I've just learned that about myself. Learning is one of the ways God has created me to stay healthy. And so I give myself permission to read. And so 4 o'clock comes, I'm sick of answering emails. Down goes the laptop, grab a book. I'm sitting in a chair with a glass of water, and I'm just going to read a book for a while. Because it restores me, it renews me, it gets my mind thinking. That's me. Now what is you? Going for a walk in the woods, knitting, painting? What does it look like for you? Think outside of the box. Do you know that 9 to 5 and 40-hour work weeks are non-biblical concepts? They're not unbiblical, they're just not biblical. So don't orient your life around the clock. We're told to work 6 and cease 1. That's one structure we're given, so do that for sure, whatever that one day is. I beg of you to do that. But what do you need? Know yourself well. Let the Father show you who you are, and what does it look like for you to walk well with Him. And all the responsibilities in your life, whether you're single or a student or married or have kids or no kids or leadership responsibility or none, whatever it is, what does it look like to walk well with God in your life? And what are the practices you need? And so I'd encourage you to do this for your own journey, but go ahead and expand this out on an 8.5 by 11 here and put this in the hand of every worker that comes across and say, hey, this is something that we're shown. Would it be helpful for you guys to work on this? And then, we don't want to hold you accountable to it. This is your walk with God. But then if you say, yeah, we want to do one spiritual retreat a week or a week retreat a year, then how can we help get that done? You need some money? You need a spiritual director? Do you need a retreat place? What do you need? How come? That is brilliant stuff. That fosters spiritual vibrancy in missionaries' lives, and your leaders' lives, and your pastors' lives, whoever you engage. So there's one tool for you. Any questions about that? Yeah.
I don't think you're going to have an answer for this, but I need to get this off my chest.
Sure.
Where we go, and we're going to be going in April again.
Mm-hmm.
The senior people are surgeons at a hospital.
Uh-huh.
It's the scenario you started with last night. They are also, by virtue of their seniority and the fact that a lot of the missionaries are young, and like, I don't know about this, but they're responsible for working the visas, and we just lost 4 families just got kicked out of the country in the last 3 months. They're in the visa offices in the capital constantly, and they're the only ones who can do all this stuff. They're running all the committees, and they're resilient as all get out, and they're healthy. I'm just up against it. If you say do some of this stuff on this chart, they're going to go, okay, that means more missionaries are going to get kicked out of the country because
Who's going to do the visas? Yeah, right.
Sometimes it just gets up against it.
Yeah, sure.
You can say it as a member.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're right. I don't have an answer for you because it's very simple for us to look at a tool like this, but of course everything has to be applied to the context. We're cross-cultural workers, so we understand enculturation. So things have to be enculturated to our organizational cultures as well as international cultures. Anything that I would respond to would be premature because I just don't know enough about the situation. But thank you for raising the question, and it's not an uncommon one. I mean, too few people doing too many of the important jobs, and if they stop doing the jobs, then the wheels fall off. People get sent home. So something in the system is not healthy. So it's a bigger picture than are they doing their Bible study? Yeah, it's a systemic issue, and those are complex. I mean, I work for an organization, and everybody thinks Barnabas is all wonderful, but hey, we're a family, and every family's dysfunctional. We got our stuff, and so our responsibility is, okay, what's our stuff? Are we aware of it? Are we willing for God to show it? And what should we be leaning into? And maybe we should get some outside voices to help us see our stuff, because I don't see my own stuff, whatever that stuff is. But yeah, that's all. I think the first place to start is to say, something doesn't seem quite right here. What should we do about that? That at least starts the conversation. And then, again, I'd turn it back into a relational issue and, Father, show us your ways. What does it look like for us to live? But all right, just a couple thoughts here. Let me open it up here. What have you seen worked really well in your own personal life or in your church's history or in your organizational or in your member care work, whatever context you're in? What are some things that you've seen done really well that you know have promoted spiritual vibrancy amongst those doing this work? Just throw some ideas out here. Feel free to, we're just going to beg, borrow, and steal from one another's ideas, all right? What have you learned and seen out there? Oh, come on now. Yes, ma'am.
The first time I came to this, we learned to respond to missionary letters when they send it.
Hmm.
And we got it, so that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Just a quick
Yep.
email.
Yep.
Hopefully not burdensome,
Yep.
but that-
Great. Yeah. Those of us who have written support letters or prayer letters know the thing goes out there. Is anybody reading it, or is it just, just getting filed away like everything else that's coming through the mail? So, yeah. Very simple relational thing. Just know that, I read that. I'll be praying for you this Sunday because you're preaching. God bless you. Let us know anything. Hey, that goes a long ways. Great. Thank you. Yes.
Our regional director in East Africa has scheduled the last several years 2 gatherings per year. One is continuing education, and the other one is spiritual renewal and retreat.
Fantastic. Love it.
Morale.
Yeah, let's do a little bit of math equation there. Gather people together, put into their lives ongoing education, you said, professional development, and also a time where they can just grow spiritually. Morale goes up. I'm telling you, those type of investments reap profound fruit. If their morale's going up, I can't imagine how Christ is overflowing from their lives and people they're working with. Wonderful. Thank you. Yes. Uh-huh. Oh, great.
We had other responsibilities on the ground, but we went on our training, and we prepared spiritual retreats well received. I think there's this reality of when you want to care for those serving on the front lines, there's a lot of spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
So we encountered that in preparing for the retreat.
Interesting, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I think the other thing I say is that it was great. We loved the training. It was
Yeah.
great to do, but we had many other responsibilities in the field. So
Yeah.
it really would have been something nice if our organization could commit to it to bring those from outside.
Sure.
On a regular basis.
Yeah, a couple of good points again there. Again, notice somebody was very intentional in allowing for some professional training and development. Perfect. That always encourages people. So you heard me say it last night. Churches, and one of the biggest things you can do, or organizations, is set money aside if you want to create what's called a developmental culture. We have a culture in which we want to always be intentionally developing our people, professionally, relationally, spiritually, emotionally, whatever it is that they need. And so there was some deliberate training went on, but yet you guys had lots of responsibilities to go along with that. So in some sense, it kind of feels like piling on. We do my regular job and also do this stuff as well. But so bring outside people in as well. Can we send somebody to you who can lead a retreat or something like that? But again, intentional, deliberate. Somebody in leadership said we need to do this, and they got it done. That's wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, when we lived in Ghana, West Africa, we'd have these spiritual retreats that were mission-wide, but for those of us with little kids, it wasn't much of a retreat.
Yeah. Sure.
Now at Bethlehem Baptist, we have Lady that goes and she organizes retreats for the kids. So the kids are doing their thing over here. They get revived, they get taught, and then we get.
Yep. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing that more and more where, like, for example, I've been asked to speak at different retreats, different organizational gatherings in different places in Asia and such, and those organizations will find a church in the U.S. who will send a team over who will provide VBS or care for the kids so that the adults can really be engaged and focused. That's great. Perfect. Did I see another hand over here? Yeah, over here.
Well, just to add to that, that's something that I've been involved with helping churches do that. So it becomes a really worthwhile short-term trip.
Yeah, yeah.
And it becomes a way for the local churches to actually invest in their folks
Yes.
on the field and to
Yep.
see their work, and it becomes good PR work when they go home.
Yes.
And the other thing, too, I know a lot of you probably have had to organize your own conferences, your own spiritual retreats, and it's exhausting. You were
Yeah.
exhausted before you did it, and then you have to organize it, and it's just exhausting for everyone. You're thinking, wait, that's not the point.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if anybody has seen local churches from the outside can
It's
provide.
a great idea. Yeah. Yeah, again, the idea there, whether it's a local church or a professional caregiver or somebody who's trained, is bringing something from the outside who provides that service so that everybody gets to partake of it. So those are great ideas. Yes. Is there a hand over here? Yes.
Yeah, that cycle of grace has become a real filter in my life. I use one that's a tiny bit tweaked from that. but
I'm sure.
It's very much the same.
Uh-huh.
That filter, even as I try to think of it, even on a daily basis, which way am I going around? Clockwise. or
Good.
counterclockwise?
Great.
Sharing that with other people.
Yeah.
Asking at the bottom there about the calling, or in mine it says achievements.
Yeah, achievements, right? Yeah.
I learned to ask myself, what is Jesus' definition of achievement?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Good. Great self-awareness, good reflection there. Perfect. Good. Yes.
We have a licensed marriage and family therapist
Mhm.
that has offered free counseling to missionaries in our home.
Great. Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. When we especially want to take advantage of when people are coming back through. Those are, obviously, we have quite a few people who've lived and worked cross-culturally, but the non-laughing joke is that missionaries hate furloughs or home assignments or whatever because they leave the field exhausted. They come home. The organization wants them to speak here, there. They got to go visit all these churches. And oh, by the way, grandma hasn't seen them for 5 years, and so the family's pulling on them. And what they really want to do is just go find a deserted island under a palm tree and just sit there for a month. I mean, they're just so tired, and so they leave the field tired. They come home, they're frazzled, and they go back to the field more tired. And so if churches would take a tremendous amount of deliberation, I mean, let the missionaries decide when is the best time and how to do it, but just say, we'd like for you to have 2, 4, 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months. We just want you to unplug, totally disengage, a mini sabbatical type of thing, and make it a policy in that we want to give permission to it, we want to give structure to it, we want to give resources to it. I'm telling you, we don't want to think in short-term blocks. We have people going for 2 or 3 years. How do we help them stay there for 30 years? Now, I don't know what God's intentions are for the rest of their life, but if we're doing things early on where we're showing them that we really are going to invest in them, we really are going to resource them, we really want to keep them vibrant and renewed, they go back fresh, and they're back in the game, and they're ready to go. Yes?
We're talking a lot about global missionaries, but we, for example, in Cannon Falls, support missionaries that are in Dover.
Uh-huh.
So navigators can't apply to these ones that are just
Oh, sure, absolutely.
just a family just providing their home for
Yeah.
a retreat for a couple.
Yep.
Somebody else taking care of the kids, all those kinds of
Sure.
things.
Yeah. And your pastoral staff. When was the last time your pastor had a sabbatical? Sure. Yeah, it's endemic. It's endemic in the evangelical world. Yeah. And the last very section there, just some ideas that I threw out there. I'd encourage whoever you're engaging, ask them if they have spiritual guides in their life, people that they can talk to regularly, debrief, process life outside of their organization. Again, I talked about resourcing and giving permission. Permission is huge. I think you heard Nairi say it this morning. It's saying that by simply asking the questions and say, would you like, and we would love to see if there's some way that we can encourage your personal vibrancy. I mean, that's huge. I mean, like, it's okay if we do that? Yeah, we want, how can we help you? And that's huge. I'm telling you, in the evangelical world, that's still talked about too little. I mean, if your pastor stood up this Sunday and he said, I'm going to take a 6-month sabbatical, you're going to hear a gasp in the crowd. Oh, who's going to lead us? Who's going to preach? We're going to fall apart. And so pastors don't take sabbatical. By the time they've been in the ministry 30 years, I've literally heard men and women who are in full-time ministry say, I do this because I don't know what else I'd do with my life. That's what happens with 30 years of no spiritual renewal. They're not finishing well. We want to avoid that. Yeah. Great question. Granting permission and requiring. There's two ways to go about that. One way you can say is, we'd like to give you guys a retreat, and the response would be, I don't need that. Say, okay. And then 5 years when they come back around, they're exhausted. Say, remember that retreat you mentioned? Yeah, sure, you want that now? I mean, that's one way you can go. It's because we tend to learn the hard way, all of us do. The other way is to again, I just want to encourage, within our organization, we are not a policy-driven organization. We don't have a lot of policies. The policies we do have in place are meant to be protective of the staff, not protective of the leadership. But at the same time, we want to say what we have seen. Here's the patterns we have seen with our staff. Those staff who do such and such and such and such, they tend to be here by the 5th year of their work. Those who don't tend to be struggling. And so, again, just try to relationally, conversationally, be persuasive. There may be a time where you can say, you know what, you may not see the red dash lights on your dashboard, but we do, and I think you need to go to this debriefing or whatever. And you get, again, if there's a high relational trust, then leadership can get mildly a little bit more heavy-handed. But when it starts coming down as top-down directives, it seldom isn't received well. So it's a subtle relational nuance. Again, I hope you hear the key operative dynamic here is relationship. Our relationship with our God and how that overflows in our relationship with one another. If we're talking amongst ourselves, asking each other, leaning in, being intentional by design, it wins the day. We don't do things perfectly. We mess up and have to say we're sorry, but I think it wins the day over the long haul. A few resources for you. If you would like to read more about this Trinitarian perspective, I cannot recommend Michael Reeves' book enough, Delighting in the Trinity. Michael Reeves is a historical theologian from the UK. That may all sound like a bunch of stuffy stuff, but I'm telling you what, Reeves has a sense of humor that I've seldom seen in a Brit. I mean, his book would get me chuckling once in a while. He's brilliant. He brings it down in very simple tones. It is one of the most significant books I have read in the last 5 years of my life. We've asked everybody on our staff to read it. If you really enjoyed that, I have since found out this next little book here called Enjoying Your Prayer Life. It is literally like 30 pages long. I thought it was only an electronic version, but I saw somebody actually had a printed version. Enjoying Your Prayer Life, brilliant. It is so freeing. It's so relational. The book With by Skye Jethni. I'm not sure if I spelled his last name there right. This is a book I especially encourage anybody who's grown up in the church to read. This book With. He talks about the difference of living under God, for God, to God, or there's another paradigm. Then he talks about the difference of those and living with God. And it is fascinating. I highly encourage that book. It will mess with you. Called to be Saints by Gordon Smith. Gordon Smith is out of the CMA background. He's Canadian. He was in the Philippines for many, many years. He's now a president of a Bible school or seminary someplace up in Canada. I just discovered him last year and really enjoy his writings. This is essentially kind of a simple, readable theology of spiritual formation. And he will bring you to the awareness of what moralistic spirituality is and such. Very, very good. And he talks about some of the key traits of a mature Christ follower. I really enjoyed that book. I write a blog that I have been pleasantly surprised has been getting quite a wide response to, called Tending Scattered Wool. I try to get something on there every week, really short something or other, and I regularly try to address these issues. And I'm trying to generate a conversation. So anyway, those are some resources for you. Thank you so much for engaging me. We're at our time now. Can I just pray real quick and then send you out the door? Okay? Father, thank you so much for your grace. I have no doubt that far more questions were engendered than answered. And I would ask that by your Spirit, you would woo us back to you. You would turn our faces from being gazed on trying to identify the problem and come up with a plan to work the problem, to turn ourselves back to you, lift our eyes and say, Father, will you show us your ways? And every day of our breathing lives, will you continue to teach us how to walk well with you, to remind us of who we are in you as your sons and your daughters, that you do have a call in our life, but first we are born as your children. So encourage my brothers and sisters, give them great curiosity and courage to lean into these things relationally with people in their lives. May your church flourish. May the church expand around the world for the renown of Christ. Thank you, Father. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Patrick, we're to lunch, right? And lunch is down that way.